Hello there. Today, by request, I'm going to show you how to set up a rudimentary forge on a very low budget. To begin with, you need a stump. Any stump will do. Hardwood is better, but just so long as it's not rotten. You're going to want to make sure that it's level. Next, you're going to need a ball peen hammer with a wooden handle. You can get these for like $15 at Canadian Tire. Standard framing hammers are too soft for forging, so you need a proper metalworking hammer. Next, you're going to want to take a walk down by the railroad. Pick up a handful of spikes. These can be your chisels and punches. Then you're going to want a pair of vice grips to hold the chisels. This isn't strictly necessary, but it'll save you some burns. These are about $15. Finally, you're going to want a pair of pliers to act as makeshift tongs. You want these to be made out of bare steel rather than galvanized or chrome plated, as those produce dangerous vapors when heated. You also want to remove the rubber grip. Finally, you're going to need some raw material to forge with. Any old scrap metal you find by the side of the road will do. For an anvil, what you want is a heavy lump of steel. This is what I started out on. Here's how you test the quality of an anvil. You're just going to drop the hammer a short distance onto it. You're not swinging with any force because you don't want to dent it. You want to see how high the hammer bounces. On a good anvil, the hammer will bounce back up almost to where it started. What this means is that the anvil is not absorbing the force of your impact. Instead, that force is being redirected back up into the hammer. In essence, whenever you strike your workpiece, the anvil strikes it from below at the same time, letting you work twice as efficiently. Any decent-sized lump of metal will do as a makeshift anvil. This is half a barbell here. Let's see how it does. The hammer doesn't bounce when I strike, which means that the force is being transferred into the ground. So this will be a very inefficient anvil. I know a fellow who started out forging on the back of a sledgehammer. This would work. I'd just have to carve a hole in the stump to hold the hammer. Another fellow I know started out forging on the back of a splitting axe that he stuck in a log. Not as good as the hammer, but still passable. To reiterate, any lump of metal will do. I know a fellow who started out forging on the engine block of a pickup truck. It's all a question of what you're able to scrounge. For today's demonstration, I'm going to be using a spike hammer as it reminds me of medieval anvils. Whatever you choose, you're going to need some way of attaching it to the stump. For a splitting axe, you might be able to just swing it and get it stuck in the stump. For something else, you're going to need to cut out a depression. For example, for this spike hammer, I just drill a big hole and stick it in. Then I got to make sure that it's wedged in there firmly. It's not going to slip around as I'm forging. And there we go, that's my makeshift anvil. Now let's start setting up the forge. To begin with, you're going to need a big pipe. This is an exhaust pipe that I took off a dead car. Any pipe will do provided it's over an inch. Now I'm going to dig a little pit in my fireplace. This is going to be my fire pot. You don't want a very big pit, just like 4 inches across. Now I'm going to dig a little trench leading into the fire pit. And then I'm going to bury the end of the pipe. Pit forges like this, though not ideal as the ground sucks away a lot of the heat, were used by a lot of people throughout history because of their simplicity. For your makeshift bellows, what you're going to do is go down to the dollar store and get a cheap hairdryer. Then you're going to tape it onto the pipe using duct tape. This process is really hard on the hairdryer, so you don't want a good one. Get a cheap one. Don't use your wife's. I don't own a hairdryer, and I'm not willing to shell out money for it just for one video, so I'm going to cheat here. I started out on a hairdryer, so I can confirm it works. Before we get going, we're just going to test that everything is hooked up properly with no leaks. The pine needles are just for the visual. You can feel it with your hand well enough. For fuel, you either need to buy coal or buy charcoal. Coal is a lot cheaper per calorie, but charcoal is a lot more widely available. Go ask your local blacksmith where he gets his coal. Now that everything's ready, let's get the fire started. Coal is very difficult to light, so I start it with a bundle of wood shavings underneath. Once the fire gets established, you're going to want to turn on the hairdryer to spread it fast. When the fire reaches a certain size, you're going to want to start sprinkling the coal into it. You don't want to do this too fast or you'll just put out the fire. Coal has got a lot of calories, but it's kind of reluctant to burn. Once the wood shavings have burned up, if the coal is caught, you're going to add another scoop on top. After which you're just going to let the fire burn for a little while. Coal is full of tar and bitumen, and this needs to burn off before it's ready to forge. When the smoke clears, you can poke a hole in your fire and put the metal in to heat up. For milder steels, you want to forge at a bright yellow temperature. For more temperamental steels, you want to forge at a bright orange. So that's how you get everything set up. I may as well do a little bit of forging before the video is over, so I'll show you how to make a simple hook. To begin with, I'm just working the end of the metal down into a point. I'm trying to get a nice even taper that extends back about 3 or 4 inches. The metal will get harder and harder to work as it cools, but with mild steel you can continue to work it as long as there's any little bit of glow. When it's cooled to black, it goes back in the fire. It's very difficult to judge the colors correctly when you're forging outside. This is one of the reasons why blacksmith shops are often so poorly lit. Because the only things that matter are the fire and the glowing metal, you can forge just fine in pitch darkness, provided you can remember where your tools are. That's tapered enough, so I'm going to start bending it. To begin with, I'm just tapping the tip over about 90 degrees, then I'm twisting it over and bending it back on itself. Now just make sure that everything's flat, and there we go, that's enough for that heat. Now I've heated it a little bit further back, and I'm just going to bend it the other way this time. Same thing, but in a larger form. If the little bend is cooled to black, you can safely pound on it without damaging it. The metal will always take the path of least resistance. If you didn't heat it, you can quench just the little bend at the tip to protect it. I suppose that's another piece of kit you should get, is a bucket of water. The hook portion is forged, so let's cut off the unnecessary material. This is tricky with one person because you have to let go of your tongs. You need to exert enough pressure with your chisel so that it won't slip around too much. If it cools before you cut it through, you're just going to bend the hook back and forth over that cut until it breaks. There we go. Just be careful where you throw the cut-off bit. It's too cold to forge, but it's still hot enough to start fires. Now we're going to forge a little flat, rounded section for where you put the nail in. We're using the ball peen of the hammer for this part. If I were making something nice, I would also have rounded out the corners before this, but this is just going in the workshop, so it doesn't matter. On second thought, that's going to bug me, so I better knock off those corners. So there you go, a simple little hook forged in a pit fire with a makeshift anvil. The only thing left is to get my drill gun and put a hole in it. Hardly my finest work, but perfectly serviceable. Anyway, that's how to set up a cheap forge and I guess how to make a hook. Goodbye and happy forging.